Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. I'm here with the one, the only, the one with the amazing beard, the one with the new direction on his webcam, Ashley Preston. Hey Ashley, how are you?
Good morning, sir. It's an evolution of DarshanTalks today.
We are going to talk today about NDA prepping. It's not typically an area you pull your lawyers into, your regular FDA regulatory lawyers into. I'm actually curious if you guys do, what your experience is. Is it usually the outside counsel that don't get called, or is it is inside counsel like very involved, or what is the team? How do you prep? And that's sort of the goal for today. So before we get started, Ashley, do you want to tell people who you are, what you do, and why you're so amazing at what you do?
Well, because I have a great team. That's why it's so amazing. No, I'm Ashley Preston. I'm heading up regulatory, quality, medical writing, and operational excellence at Syros Pharmaceuticals. And the reason we can deliver what we deliver is because we have a great team and we hire only the best.
And I will say I know that from personal experience because I have friends who work with you and they say nothing but the best stuff about it. So you do work with the best team. So it's kind of awesome. I will also say, just to the same point you were making, we have had episodes on how you choose the best as well. So we'll try to put a link in the description that talks about how you choose the best, how you choose the right team for yourself. So that's great too. But now we have the right team with you, and you guys actually just recently filed an NDA. We aren't going to talk about specifics or anything like that, but we're going to talk a little bit about what that NDA prep looks like and the overall process associated with it. So starting from the beginning, when do you know you're going to start prepping for the NDA? Because you've been doing clinical trials now for years. When do you sort of go, okay, it's time?
Sure, absolutely. So I have to make sure we haven't filed yet, but we've kicked off the preparations for the NDA.
Thank you, and I appreciate the clarification. Just to be clear.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So we're looking at filing in 2024 after our data readout towards the end of this year. Is what we're planning on. So here we are, within the sort of year and a half space of a year and a half to 2 years before filing. You really want to think about prepping your teams. There are a lot of things you can do up front. Of course, there's a lot of data and a lot of information that you've been collecting during your IND phase, during your clinical development phase, particularly in the non-clinical and CMC arenas, that you can begin preparing your NDA, use to prepare your NDA. So physically, the NDA already exists in that sense. We have begun writing the NDA. That's clear because there are many things that you can already prep from your IND into the NDA sections. What we did just go through in the last few weeks is the official team kickoff of the NDA preparation process. And really the goal there is to bring together all of the functional leads working on the NDA. And that includes legal and IP, but all of the cross-functional leads. And to give everybody an understanding, a baseline understanding of what we're trying to achieve, set the vision for the NDA, set the goal, and also for each of the functions to present to their colleagues across the organization to present what they are doing, what they're preparing for the NDA, what work they're doing as we move between now and filing, and also to really understand what they need from everyone else to be able to do their job. Because this is a team sport. Across drug development, NDAs are very much a cross-functional matrix exercise. It's a team sport. It takes a village. All of those metaphors. And so what we did was to have everybody give that presentation and have a robust Q&A session. And the feedback we got was that for the functional areas, it was really important and really enlightening for them to understand what all the other different functions are doing. Because in their day-to-day work, they focus on their area, and they do have cross-functional interactions, of course. But in many cases, they are somewhat limited to those folks that are essential to doing their work. So, for instance, some of our folks in CMC commented that they had no idea what some of the other functional areas were doing because it doesn't typically involve them on a day-to-day basis. So it was really great for them to have that opportunity to see the full scope of the NDA and vice versa. A lot of folks don't interact with CMC a lot because they're not involved in those areas, but there are always things that can come up in any functional area that could affect the totality of your NDA success, both in the preparation and in the execution of the filing. So it's really important, I think, to set that baseline, and it builds team morale, builds team sort of collegiality, if you like, amongst the organization. It really sets everybody on the right path to beginning their work. For us, that beginning of work is really then now setting out the governance structure within the organization, and the next steps between here and the all-important data readout is really to get as much of that work done as possible, both physically creating the NDA, setting the strategy, storyboarding the NDA. That's one of the critical parts, is the storyboard. What is it going to look like? How are you going to tell the story to the regulators, to FDA, to EMA and others? What is that story of your molecule going to look like? And a component of that then is scenario planning. So what happens if we have X data, Y data, Z data? Because data can vary, and you have to take into account some of those potential variations. So you are planning ahead of the game as to how you would craft that story, and ultimately that benefit risk analysis and the outcome thereof, which is really fundamental to driving regulatory success for a new product. So
I'm going to start to a man with a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. So in my situation, and I can say this because I've done this with clients. I worked through a lot of sort of clinical trial transparency work after the fact, right? So in those situations, and you're probably seeing a lot of that now, EMA is coming out and saying, you know what, we're going to take your data, your clinical study reports, and we're going to actually publish them. And a lot of companies have found themselves going, wait a second, our IP, our bread and butter, our crown jewels are going to be available for the world to see. Obviously, there are limits like CBI or CCI, company confidential information, or confidential business information, but it's controlled in a very, very rigid way. The big takeaway as I started doing that with a lot of clients was this changes how we're going to write our NDAs going forward, because we aren't going to put that out in the same way as we did before. We're going to make the redaction process easier. We're going to make the disclosure of what needs to be included different. In your experience now, as someone who's done it, quote unquote, the old way, and is seeing this evolution to a new radical transparency, is this change? And the reason I raise this question is you talked about how IP is involved, and that was inevitably the people I would engage with. Have you found yourself changing that process, or is there a lack of awareness, or is it still work as usual and the goal has always been to be transparent? How does it all come together for you?
No, they're very good questions, and it's important considerations for all companies now. I think where we're trying to, the approach that we are trying to take is, and we have a stellar medical writing team, and they are very focused on the concept of lean writing. So writing our documents in a way that they convey the messages that we are looking to convey. They accurately convey the data that exists for the product, and it tells a coherent story. It tells a persuasive story. It is complete and of high quality, but it is as lean as possible. And so in that way, not only does it help in terms of the redaction process, but it also helps the reviewers. So the more lean, if you like, you can make your documents, the better you can craft your story in a concise but persuasive way, the easier it is for the reviewers at the end of the day to understand what you're trying to convey and to work their way through your file. Because let's not forget, an NDA is a huge task. And whilst it is divided amongst the different reviewers and review specialties, that's still a huge amount of work to review. So the easier we can make that, the better the review process can go. And it goes hand in hand with enabling a much more efficient redaction process. But it's definitely a consideration. And to your earlier point around having the lawyers, the legal team and the IP team in, we definitely have them in the work streams. They're there to also make sure that what we're saying is consistent with what we have in our patent portfolio, for instance, or what we're saying is legally sound in the sense of for a public company. So that element, and notwithstanding the fact that typically lawyers are pretty crafty with language as well, so it doesn't hurt to have them, helping us to create the right messaging along the way. But it really takes a great medical writing team and along that to bring our SMEs who have the technical knowledge along for the journey and help them to craft that all important lean story that is persuasive and high quality for NDA success.
So let's explore that a little bit more, because you talked a little bit about having the right medical writing team, and you're correct. That's going to be critical as you go forward. So 2 questions that come out of it. The first, do you try to build that medical writing team internally, or do you think that it's better to bring in the experts from outside? And do you see this as, and I guess what I'm trying to understand is, if you build this medical writing team for the next year and a half, mentally, what do you do with them at the end of the year and a half? I recognize that there will be work that flows through, but it's not going to be the same volume after that. And let's explore that for a second, and then we can come back to the additional questions.
Sure. I'll give you the typical regulatory answer. It depends. So I think that and medical writing exists in many different ways, but two of the larger buckets that I've seen is medical writing as a commodity, putting words onto page, writing words on a page, typing words on a page. That's medical writing as a commodity. But then you think about strategic medical writing, which is really what the component that you want to make sure you have a strong team in-house to deliver, because medical writing is central to everything that you do. I mean, this is, every 99% of documents that we write are for regulatory submissions. And so that synergy between regulatory and medical writing is one of the reasons why they sit under the same, group umbrella at Syros. And so having strategic medical writers who can not only deliver the documents and the text and the context and formatting and so on, all of those components you think of in medical writing, but deliver the strategy for how we're going to craft that story and how we're going to do it in the leanest possible way. So you have that in-house. And then the physical putting words on a page can be outsourced, can be commoditized, but has to be strategically led by, in my opinion, by great in-house folks who have the knowledge and experience in medical writing, but also have the history and the knowledge of your program, because that can take a lot to bring external people up to speed in a reasonably short time that you have to prepare an NDA. I mean, let's face it, you start well ahead, but when crunch time comes, when that last data point comes from your pivotal study, and then it's between there and the only thing standing between you and a filing, is completing the NDA writing, review approval and pressing the button to submit to FDA. That's when crunch time happens, and that's when you need, the all hands on deck and the best possible team. And so there, you don't want to be bringing external people up to speed on your program at that time. You want everything to just run. So doing the preparation ahead of time and having the great medical writing experts in-house to provide that strategic oversight is critical. But, we need some horsepower to actually churn out the documents. Absolutely. There's plenty of vendors who can do that for you and do that at a very high level.
So that raises several questions. So for me, I think about this fundamental dichotomy in the law is when I'm advising these clients, I'll often get tell me about your I'll do the tell me about your product thing, and they'll start off because they've been they think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I'm talking on medical devices because that's a lot of those have been coming through recently. But my product is amazing. It's going to cure cancer. No one's ever seen anything like this, because I feel like they've been talking to the patent lawyers. And the patent lawyers are going, tell me everything unique about your product because it's going to be amazing. And that's what I need to get it across the USPTO finish line. And then I come in and I go, no. In my case, tell me everything that's boring about your product, because the patent lawyers are trying to say your stuff is unique. The FDA does not want to see unique. The FDA wants to see the exact opposite. FDA wants to see that it raises no new questions of safety and efficacy. So what you land up with is this dichotomy of it's novel, unusual, amazing, and it's boring. You've seen it 1,000 times before. In the same way, when you're writing an NDA, how do you balance the goal of FDA, this is boring. You should not think about this too much more. This raises very few questions of safety and efficacy, with marketing in your ear constantly going, this needs to be amazing. The label needs to stick out. We need this to be amazing because we got to sell this right after the FDA approves it. So how do you bring those two worlds together?
Yes. Well, first you kick marketing out of the NDA process. No, absolutely. I mean, the label, at the end of the day, the label is what a product will live and die by. But the way you construct the label has to be based on scientific fact. And so really it's critical. So when you think about writing an NDA, you're not writing a patent application, as you say. It's a different beast. You really are crafting the story of your molecule and really leading the reviewer through the data to give them not only the data itself, but the context for that, both in your therapeutic area, in your class, or in your modality. And so the better you can craft that story and have all of the facets of that included. So understanding this is the data we saw, what does it mean? And what does it mean is really the art form, because anybody can put a data table into a document, but understanding what that means, and particularly when you get to that all important risk benefit analysis, and FDA has their, or it's an ICH risk benefit sort of template that they use now across the agencies. And so really what we've done also is to bring that in-house and say, this is our target, because ultimately this is what FDA, what EMA are going to use. They're going to fill that out in the NDA review. So why don't we make sure that we are addressing all of those components and addressing them in the best possible way? So it's a very targeted approach. But at the end of the day, I've said 100 times, it's writing the story of your molecule and shepherding that through the review process, enabling the reviewer to see clearly what you're trying to achieve and what your molecule does and what are the risks and how does that risk benefit profile stack up at the end of the day.
So it's interesting, when we started this conversation, we talked about the core group of people who need to be involved in it. And I don't know why this has become a pointing stick, but it has. But what I find amazing is, when I visualize this, right? And you're talking about this core team you're bringing together. How many people are we talking? In my head, and I'll tell you, sort of, I romanticize this a little bit, so I will admit that, because I'm not typically brought, like I said, I'm external vendor. I don't typically come into that initial conversation. But is it a 5-person team, or is it like a 10,000 people in an auditorium? Well, maybe 10,000 is too big for an auditorium, but you get what I mean. Like 1,000 people. How big is this group? And who are you deciding is in the core team? Is marketing really out, or do they have a voice, but it's not within that core group? How does that all come together?
Sure, absolutely. So it's there are multiple teams working towards the NDA, and one of that includes you have to have the commercial piece included in there, because ultimately you have to understand that the NDA team has to understand whether they're delivering what is a commercially viable product. Is it addressing the unmet medical need that's been identified in the market? Now, ultimately, that's what we're trying to achieve, to bring that new medicine to patients, and they are a segment of a market that needs to be identified, and you need to have in your mind that vision, all the way along through the NDA process. In fact, you have it from clinical development. That's precisely why you choose the patient populations that you do. So that's one piece. We have an NDA Go team, if you like, who are sort of the key driving functions and coordinating functions within the organization and within that NDA program. And so typically that is going to be your program management, your regulatory, your medical writing, who are making the engine work, if you like, to deliver on that NDA. But then you also have a number of working groups to deliver on each sort of functional area. So you have the major components of the dossier. So you've got a non-clinical working group, you've got a clinical working group, you've got a CMC working group, you've got a labeling working group, all important in making sure that all of those pieces come together in the label. You may also have kind of a commercial/legal compliance working group. Make sure that, because there are a number of things that are involved in the NDA filing itself that people don't think of in Module 1, the financial disclosures, so on and so forth. There are a number of things that need to be taken care of there as well. And then those groups could be quite large. Could be sort of 10, 12, 15 people, depending on the number of activities and the complexity of that area. So if we hone in on CMC, you've got CMC as a bucket sounds relatively simple, but you've got drug substance, drug product, analytical,
right.
But supply chain, you've got quality in there as well. So there are a number of pieces there, but it's really like that sort of root system, if you like, of the tree. And so all of the teams feed in and feed up until they get to that central core team, and everything needs to be coordinated like a symphony, if you like, and conducting a symphony. So, and then ultimately you need to have that corporate approval for each of those elements. So you also want to make sure you have the governance in place up front. Everybody knows what needs to go where and who needs to make those decisions. And it's important to have on each team to have a high overlap between decision makers and doers, if you like, because you don't want to use up too much time and energy having to get approval for small things that are ultimately inconsequential or minor to the delivery of the NDA. But the big ticket items, of course, the whole organization has to buy into strategic directions. So it's a balancing act there, but it's important fundamentally to agree that up front so that everybody understands the rules of the game and where we're headed.
So, as usual, two questions. The first, you talked about the symphony. Who's the conductor?
So the conductor, to my mind, the conductor is regulatory.
Okay.
Regulatory, and they have a strong partnership with program or project management, because ultimately it's a regulatory submission, and the direction for that comes, to my mind, from regulatory affairs, from the regulatory NDA lead.
What I find fascinating is your answer was your answer was not the CEO. Regulatory reports to the CEO, but the CEO will defer to regulatory on these issues.
Right. So the leadership team obviously sets the goal.
Right.
But execution of the NDA proper is very much a team game. But you have to have somebody conducting the orchestra, and to me, that is regulatory in partnership with project management. It's almost a regulatory project management function, if you like, and they kind of merge for a while, and then because it's important to not only deliver. There are a lot of timelines to meet, but it's also important that you are delivering the right content. So, but in that NDA Go team, as we say, which is, if we think about it, more of not just a singular lead, but a leading team, the small team that coordinates, that is regulatory, project management, and medical writing. They're the critical functions there.
So let me ask you this question now. You're a regulatory guy. I do FDA regulatory law, so we may be a little bit more familiar than the average bear about this stuff. But as you undoubtedly know, the FDA has lost a series of court cases on off-label marketing. And there's been the FDA generally is unclear, and they put out, as I'm not saying something that's out of school, they've put out like a 63-page memo with 22 different options, and I forget the exact numbers, but it could be 68-page memo with 23 different options, but whatever. Point being, they are unclear how to regulate off-label speech. My question is, as you're creating and constructing the NDA, do you aim, and maybe even when you're designing the TPP, if you will, so depending on how far back you go, do you design the lowest hurdle you can jump over, or do you design the highest hurdle you can jump over so that no one else can follow you in terms of getting the NDA approved? Does that question make sense?
It's an interesting one. I've never had it put that way, which is not surprising. You always find a unique way of posing that question. To me, the idea should be to look for the patient population in which your drug can provide the most benefit at the outset, and that's particularly important, to my mind, in small biotech. So where can you deliver a treatment effect to a patient population with an unmet need in hopefully the fastest possible time. Because let's not forget, for small biotech companies, getting your first NDA approval as an organization changes the landscape for you as a company completely. So even if it is a small orphan indication, that in itself, one, is most likely fundamentally changing the game for patients in that indication, because typically your orphan indications have limited treatment options, and they are serious life-threatening diseases. That can be a game changer. But it also gets you across that hurdle of being a proven entity at delivering an NDA as an organization. Of course, you have people hired into the organization who worked elsewhere who delivered NDAs, but for your company to deliver an NDA, you are then a commercial company. You are an NDA, post NDA approval company, which right. For the investment community, for the environment at large, is a completely different space to pre-approval. So you should be thinking about that holistically as targeting that. Where do you think your drug, based on all the science you have, where do you think your drug can make the best or give the best advantage, and in that directed population, and target that with laser focus, because the rest can become a post-market sort of exercise, if you like, once you're across that line. Now, obviously, nobody just goes after one. There's always some hedging, because this is a risky business. You hedge in terms of indications for a molecule. You hedge in terms of number of molecules in your pipeline. But you should be really, really honing in on that to deliver in the small biotech space. In the big pharma space, it's a little bit slightly different, because you have sort of a bigger engine behind you. You have more cash flow. You can spread a little bit more your resources across multiple places. But still, I would argue that you have a lot of focus to deliver on those, because you don't want to be burning cash for no good reason. So I think that's how you deliver. Now, are you thinking about the lowest possible hurdle? Not necessarily. I mean, you're thinking about what can you deliver, what is reasonable to deliver when you're selecting indications based on the evolution of the science behind your product.
I think you kind of answered the question, because what I was trying to figure out is, do you, if you have, say, a drug that treats diabetes but could have a possible treatment for an orphan indication, and it's the same exact drug, do you start off by going, let's go after the diabetes because it's a massive indication and I can make a ton of money, but then everyone's guns are trained at me? Or do I cross that orphan indication, get onto market quicker, and then still pursue the diabetes indication in the future? And what I heard you say is, at least at this time, in a specific mindset that you have, your answer is start with the orphan indication, because number one, there are certain benefits associated with that. You can come to market quicker. FDA, it will be kinder if you've got a orphan indication, as opposed to if you go in with diabetes, which you have tons of competition for. So you're proving not only the product itself, but comparative efficacy becomes a real concern at that point. So it's just a faster path to market. And that changes the game, changes the cash flow coming in. You don't have to do as many studies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So is that a fair summarization of?
I think you're right there, and it's very much dependent upon the organization, the organizational maturity, or the funding available to where you are as a company, but also the space that you're looking at entering into. So with diabetes versus, hypothetically a small orphan, oncology indication, of course, is going to be a different volume of data required for approval. So that could be a strategic question particularly for a small company. For a large company, maybe you hit both, because you can do it and it's good for patients on both sides.
That's interesting, though, because I'm also wondering if I'm making this up, Pfizer, and I have no idea if this is true for Pfizer, but if you're Pfizer, you can't hit the orphan indication because you may not hit the minimum viable number. And I've heard rumors going back like 10 years where it's something like, if your product doesn't at least make 200 million, Pfizer can't pursue it. It's simply mathematically, financially not worth it for them to go after those numbers. I have no idea if that's true, but those are the numbers I'd heard of 10 years ago. If that's true, you can't pursue that indication. You have to go for the blockbusters every single time. But biotechs, you kind of can go the other direction, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there are those sort of calculations that happen internally in organizations. There's always a sort of a value proposition that needs to be examined. Right? And where you're going to invest the money that you have, and where you're going to get the best probability of success and therefore the best, generally best outcome for patients and for the organization. Those algorithms, I'm sure if somebody could master those and sell them, but I'm sure each company does their own math in that sense, depending on who they are, where they are, and where they are along the evolution of the organization.
Ashley, as always, we have run out of time because you are a fascinating speaker. Before we go, any parting words?
Oh, let me see. Well, I'm hoping that everybody is, well into the year now. We're enjoying the year. Everybody's set up for a successful 2023, and thinking about delivering new medicines to patients across this industry.
Ashley, thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much, sir.